become a battleground for drug cartels and security forces. And violence continues in other parts of Mexico. A series of attacks on taxis in the western resort city of Acapulco has left 12 people dead. Police say drivers and passengers were among the victims. Taxi drivers have previously been targeted for extortion or recruited by the gangs to transport drugs. At least 2 people have been injured in a landslide in northern Taiwan. This closed-circuit footage shows its first moments in Keelung. At least 6 people were trapped in the debris but have since been rescued. And in sport, history has been made.
Happy birthday, Trevor Bayne, 20 years old.
In only his second top-level race, 20-year-old Trevor Bayne has become the new NASCAR Daytona 500 champion. Bayne broke Jeff Gordon's 26-year record to become the youngest winner in the competition's history. The race had a record 16 cautions that wiped out many of the leaders. At a time like this, it looks totally chaotic.
Well, whose fault was that?
Thanks for watching Al Jazeera. These are the stories making headlines. Pro-reform unrest in Libya has spread to the capital Tripoli as protesters in Benghazi claim to be in control of the city. Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, has appeared on state television to say his father remains in charge with the army's backing. And he warned protesters risked igniting a civil war.
We will not give up Libya. We will fight until the last man, woman, until the last bit of energy. We will not leave it. We will not leave our country to let AlJazeera laugh at us, Al Arabiya or the BBC or any traitors who live abroad and laugh at it and laugh at us here in Libya. We will not allow that.
European Union foreign ministers, meanwhile, are expected to condemn the use of force against pro-reform protesters in Libya. That's according to a draft joint statement. The ministers are meeting in Brussels. The joint statement will be considered at the meeting on Monday. Yemen's president has just spoken to the media in response to ongoing anti-government protests there. Ali Abdullah Saleh, who's been in power for more than 30 years, said calls for regime change are unacceptable. He said demands for change across the region are like a contagious disease. Reports from Sudan that the country's President Omar al-Bashir will not stand at the next election. That's according to a senior official from the ruling National Congress Party. The next presidential elections in Sudan are due in 4 years' time. A suicide car bomber has exploded and killed at least 5 people. Police said it went off near one of the training centers in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. New proposals to try to end the political stalemate in Côte d'Ivoire are due to be put to the rival camps in the coming hours. 5 African leaders have been meeting in Mauritania to try to find a solution. Incumbent President Laurent Gbagbo has been clinging to power after disputed elections last year. An Indian court upheld the death sentence for the sole surviving gunman of the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Mohammed Ajmal Amir Kassab was found guilty last May for his part in the attacks that killed 166 people and injured 300 others. Egypt burning is next.
Began as a demonstration and turned into a revolution. 2 weeks of anti-government protests and Egypt is on a knife edge. Hosni Mubarak declares he won't run again for president. His son, Gamal, has been ruled out as the next in line. And a vice president, Omar Suleiman, has been appointed for the first time in 30 years. Egypt's health ministry says 11 people have been killed. But agencies report more than 300 deaths, with thousands more wounded. When protests began on the 25th of January, peaceful demonstrations were met with a brutal police force. As the calls for regime change move into their third week, Egyptians have broken down the barrier of fear. We are saying enough with the regime! But cracks between the protesters have started to show.
What was really interesting about the third week of these protests is that everyone was talking about the momentum and momentum being lost, but the momentum that was being lost wasn't actually inside Liberation Square, where people were very much still united together in this quest to bring down Hosni Mubarak. The momentum that was changing was outside of the square, in the other parts of Cairo and beyond, where people had started to say, well, listen, Hosni Mubarak has now said that he won't run again. You only have to bear him for another few months. Why don't the protesters just leave the square? They've got what they want. So people were talking about a loss of momentum, but we never felt that inside Liberation Square. We only felt it outside.
I announced that I will similarly remain adamant to continue to shoulder my responsibility.
An immovable head of state and resolute protesters standing firm on their call for the president to resign. Egypt has reached deadlock. Tahrir Square has become a tent city, a permanent vigil for the anti-government protesters.
They're every single night they're sleeping under the wheels of tanks and armoured personnel carriers, determined not to be squeezed in, as they put it, with this protest.
The mood by that morning had begun to shift a little bit, in the sense that shops were opening, stores were opening, very basic stuff, but enough to get enough commercial activity going where people themselves were beginning to question whether or not this prolonged standoff was serving the interests of the country, or whether or not it was being somewhat detrimental to the economic activity of daily life.
A fading momentum and Mubarak's promises of reform have threatened to derail the anti-government movement.
Well, by the time we had entered the third week, we could clearly see that there was no progress being made in terms of the talks. I mean, President Mubarak was adamant on trying to engage the protesters through political means. He was trying to appease them with what was described as half-hearted measures. And the protesters were very much defiant. You know, on more than one occasion, we felt that they were, you know, maybe their support was going to wane, perhaps their morale was going to decrease. But in reality, it never did.
Calls for regime change are in danger of dying out. But anti-government protesters receive a spark of hope from an unknown Egyptian. Google executive and political activist Wael Ghonem is